The tightly knit, working-class community of Frankford in Philadelphia during the mid-1980s was characterized by its rows of modest brick homes and a strong sense of neighborly trust, a place where people felt a deep sense of security within the familiar confines of their own streets and homes, rarely considering the possibility of a violent intruder shattering their peace. This pervasive feeling of safety was utterly destroyed in the spring of 1985, when a series of brutally calculated attacks began targeting the neighborhood's most vulnerable residents, elderly women living alone, who found themselves victims of a predator whose methods were as silent as they were vicious, marking the terrifying commencement of a reign of terror that would earn the unknown assailant the chilling moniker of the Frankford Slasher. The first documented attack established the horrifying pattern that would define the entire case, as an elderly woman was violently awakened in the deepest hours of the night by a dark figure standing over her bed, who then proceeded to slash her repeatedly with a sharp blade before melting back into the darkness without a sound, leaving her severely wounded but miraculously alive, a fate that would not be granted to all those who subsequently encountered this shadowy assailant. What made the Frankford Slasher particularly terrifying to both residents and investigators was his seemingly supernatural ability to enter homes without triggering alarms or leaving behind any discernible signs of forced entry, suggesting a deeply methodical and patient individual who likely studied his target's residences extensively beforehand and possessed either a locksmith's sophisticated skill set or an intimate knowledge of the specific vulnerabilities present in the aging locks and windows common to Philadelphia's architectural style. His victims, all women over the age of 60, consistently reported waking to the shocking sensation of being cut rather than the sound of a break-in, indicating a predator who prioritized absolute stealth and surgical precision over brute force, and who derived a perverse sense of power from the intimate violation of attacking someone in the one place they should have felt most safe, their own bed. The attacks notably lacked any clear motive, as they were not sexually driven and did not involve theft of valuable items, removing the most conventional reasons for such crimes, and leaving detectives profoundly baffled as to whether they were hunting a deeply disturbed individual, acting on uncontrollable compulsions, or a calculating killer whose motivations existed entirely outside the realm of standard criminal understanding. As the number of attacks steadily grew throughout 1985 and continued into 1986, the palpable fear within the Frankfurt community intensified exponentially, with families hastily installing additional locks and reinforced bars on their doors and windows, while many elderly residents took to sleeping with lights burning through the night or keeping makeshift weapons close at hand, effectively transforming their homes from sanctuaries of rest into fortified spaces where every faint noise or creak of the floorboards became a potential signal of impending violence. The local police department launched extensive and resource-draining investigations, significantly increasing patrols and conducting countless interviews, but the nearly complete absence of physical evidence or reliable witnesses made substantive progress virtually impossible, forcing them to confront the maddening reality that they were hunting a ghost who seemed to possess an uncanny understanding of their investigative procedures, allowing him to avoid leaving behind the crucial clues necessary for identification. Despite the intense efforts of law enforcement and the growing, albeit brief, media attention that labeled him the Frankford Slasher, the elusive nature of the crimes and the absence of a clear pattern beyond the victim's advanced age and gender meant the case never achieved the widespread national notoriety of other serial predators, causing it to remain largely a local nightmare that simmered beneath the surface of the city's broader concerns with more conventional crime statistics. The legal status of free African Americans in the early 1800s was precarious at best. While they were not enslaved, they possessed few of the rights enjoyed by white citizens. They could not vote, serve on juries, or testify against white defendants in most courts. Their freedom could be challenged at any time, and they were required to carry papers proving their status. For criminals like Patty Cannon, these legal vulnerabilities created opportunities for exploitation. Into this environment stepped Patty Cannon, a woman who would prove that evil recognizes no gender boundaries. Contemporary accounts describe her as a large, physically imposing woman with unusual strength for her gender. She stood nearly 6 feet tall in an era when most women barely reached 5 feet, and she possessed what neighbors described as an intimidating presence. Her voice was reportedly deep and commanding, and she had a reputation for violent outbursts when crossed. Her husband Jesse died under mysterious circumstances around 1826. Some later claimed she poisoned him, leaving her a widow with complete control over the family property. By this time, she had already begun forming the criminal connections that would make her name synonymous with terror. Local law enforcement was virtually non-existent in the rural border region, and what little authority existed was often corrupt or simply overwhelmed by the scale of criminal activity. The social dynamics of the region also favored criminal enterprises. The white population was sparse and often transient, consisting largely of small farmers, laborers, and people seeking to escape their pasts in more settled areas. There was little sense of community cohesion, and neighbors often minded their own business, regardless of what they might suspect about their neighbors' activities. This isolation and indifference would prove crucial to Cannon's ability to operate undetected for so many years. The transformation of Patty Cannon from frontier widow to criminal mastermind began with her daughters' marriages, in a pattern that would define the next 2 decades. Both of the young women's husbands were slave kidnappers. Her first husband, Henry Brereton, was a blacksmith who supplemented his income by capturing free African Americans for sale in the South. In 1811, Brereton was arrested and imprisoned in Georgetown, Delaware for kidnapping, but he managed to escape from jail that same year. Brereton's criminal activities had been well known in the local community long before his arrest. As a blacksmith, he had legitimate reasons to travel throughout the region, visiting farms and settlements to shoe horses and repair tools. This mobility provided perfect cover for his illegal activities. He would identify potential victims during his legitimate business calls, noting which families had teenage children or young adults who might bring high prices in southern slave markets. The methods employed by early kidnappers like Brereton were often crude but effective. They relied on deception, overwhelming force, and the isolated nature of rural life to capture their victims. A common technique involved approaching free African American families with offers of employment in distant locations. Parents desperate for economic opportunities for their children would sometimes allow them to travel with these supposed employers, only to discover too late that they had signed their children's death warrants. It was after his escape that the first documented murder connected to the Cannon family occurred. Brereton, working with Patty Cannon and another criminal named Joseph Griffith, ambushed a slave trader known only as Rigdell at Cannon's tavern. The plan was simple but brutal. Get the victim drunk, rob him of his money and slaves, then eliminate the witness. Court records show that Rigdell was shot and killed during the robbery. Brereton and Griffith were eventually captured and hanged on April 13, 2013, but Patty Cannon escaped prosecution. The Rigdell murder marked a significant escalation in the criminal activities centered around the Cannon property. Prior to this incident, the family had been involved primarily in facilitating kidnappings and providing safe haven for criminals passing through the region. The willingness to commit murder for profit demonstrated a level of ruthlessness that would characterize all of Cannon's future activities. Contemporary newspaper accounts of the Rigdell case provide disturbing details about the crime. The victim had been traveling through the region with a substantial amount of money. Estimates suggest between $3,000 intended for purchasing enslaved people in local markets. He had stopped at what he believed was a legitimate tavern for food and lodging. Unaware that he had walked into a trap, the conspirators plied him with alcohol throughout the evening, waiting for the right moment to strike. When Rigdell finally retired to his room, Brereton and Griffin followed him. Neighbors later reported hearing shouting and the sound of a struggle followed by a gunshot. By morning, Rigdell was dead. His money was gone, and his wagon and horses had disappeared. The body was hastily buried on the property, beginning what would become a regular practice of using the isolated location as a dumping ground for murder victims. The legacy of the Frankford Slasher is a complex tapestry of community trauma, investigative frustration, and the haunting possibility that the perpetrator may have never faced any form of justice for the fear and suffering he inflicted upon a vulnerable population. The case serves as a sobering reminder of the limitations of forensic science and investigative techniques in the 1980s, an era before DNA analysis and digital surveillance became standard tools for solving such complex crimes, leaving detectives reliant on eyewitness accounts and traditional police work that proved inadequate against a foe of such stealth and calculation. For the families of the victims and the residents who lived through that era, the memory of the slasher is not a faded historical footnote, but a vivid and painful chapter in their personal histories, a time when their sense of security was systematically dismantled by an invisible enemy who was never held accountable for his actions, leaving a permanent void where closure should reside. In the decades since the last attack, the story of the Frankfurt Slasher has largely faded from public memory, overshadowed by more sensational crimes and the relentless passage of time which inevitably dulls even the sharpest of societal fears. Yet the unanswered questions continue to linger for those who study such cases, representing a puzzle that still yearns for a solution, a dark thread in the broader fabric of American criminal history that remains stubbornly untied. The possibility remains, however faint, that advances in forensic technology could one day be applied to preserved evidence from the crime scenes, offering a belated opportunity to finally put a name to the phantom who haunted Frankfurt and provide long-delayed answers to the families who still wonder about the identity of the individual who brought such terror into their lives. What are your thoughts on the Frankfurt Slasher case? Why do you believe this specific predator was able to operate with such effective stealth without leaving behind any clear physical evidence? And what might have motivated his precise choice of elderly female victims living in a very specific community? Share your detailed theories and insights in the comments below. The archives of the Penance Files are always open for thoughtful discussion and collective investigation by our community of dedicated mystery enthusiasts. And if you believe that every victim of crime deserves to be remembered, and that every case, no matter how old or seemingly forgotten, deserves to have its story told in the unwavering hope that new information may one day come to light, then please subscribe to our channel and tap the notification bell to join us as we continue to seek the truth, honor the forgotten, and explore the darkest chapters of history in our relentless pursuit of resolution. Next on the Penance Files, Dr. No, the Surgeon of Silence. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story from the archives.